Calling from a 917 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Paul from Queens.
Hello, Paul. What's on your mind?
Just thinking of all the immigration stuff, and I grew up. I feel like I'm sort of replaying my childhood in that, like, I grew up in Yonkers, New York, and there was this whole big desegregation battle, and like the city almost went bankrupt, and it was like kind of like the Trump. I lived in sort of the what would be now like the Trump supporter part, and I feel like I don't really know how to express it, but I feel like liberals, we kind of need to talk about immigration in a more nuanced way, because kind of what happened at Yonkers was like a lot. They were going to desegregate the housing, and that scared people. People were scared because they came from the Bronx. The Bronx was burning and all that kind of stuff, and these were people who probably like in their day probably worked with more people of color than a lot of people, right? But they very much wanted, this kind of middle class community, and they perceived it to be under threat. Turns out, like, some of the politicians were lying and making it seem like they were going to put up some huge public housing and all kind of stuff, but people were kind of going crazy. And like the New York Times and like all of the liberal people were all like saying how racist everyone in Yonkers was, all the white folks in Yonkers were. And, like the judge lived in a super wealthy, very white neighborhood. There's very wealthy white neighborhoods right next door to Yonkers, which were never affected nor targeted or anything like that. And I feel like I've struggled with how to talk about this, in a sort of nuanced and accurate way. And I feel like when we call them racist, like, I understand the debate.
Your phone is breaking up, but I think your point is that when we call the racists, that it alienates them. And look,
well, it doesn't create a conversation, and the conversation,
right? I got you. I got you. I mean, that was why we sit there and we debunk things like the existence of chain immigration, and we debunk things like the idea of the lottery system is completely unvetted and just lets in anybody, and we do that. I mean, I don't.
But I feel like there's a reality that I think liberals kind of refuse to acknowledge that I saw. Like it's I live in Queens now. They're super diverse, and I see how people come from all over the world and they're just regular people. But like if you're in a middle class area and someone from a wealthy Pakistani moves next to you, people there's no problem with that. But if you're in a small town and some poor immigrants move into your neighborhood, it's very scary. Like, there's a class element to it also that kind of up in the racism part. And I just feel like if liberals are able to talk about that part, and how these people are targeted and live hard, their lives are harsh and there's a lot of harshness, and it can come out in crime and all this, there could be these harsh realities to life sort of lower on the class ladder, that if we were able to address those things, it would create obviously wouldn't convince everybody. In Yonkers, there was a lot of people who were just plain old racist, but there was a certain percentage of people that were wanting to have sort of that conversation about, well, what does it mean to have poor people move into my neighborhood? And I think by just calling people racist, you stop a lot of important conversations.
But I'm not sure. I mean, I get what you're saying in that context, but I'm not sure that there is I'm not sure, frankly, that there is an analogy, that the analogy is proper, because we're not talking about a housing question. There is no at least in this broad context that we're talking about nationally, there is no threat to anybody, right? I mean,
I don't think. I mean, look, I don't know. I mean, I think that's why people are so scared of the shithole country thing, because they legitimately feel like people, from poor countries are coming here, And I live in Queens. I don't know what's happening in some of these towns, but I would imagine that there is a bit of that there are.
I mean,
are
the example.
lower,
hold on. The example that you used, Yonkers, right? That people felt like they were under a specific threat. That my specific situation is under threat. The broader threat that I think would have to be implicit in this stuff is that this country is losing out to the Haitians and the Mexicans, and it's hard to address that. It's one thing to say, look, here's the implications of somebody moving into your neighborhood. It's another in saying, your culture's going to get better because we're going to make it more diverse. At one point, it's just you got to fight the lies so that more people don't perceive that there's a problem than there is. And I think, obviously, look, I think if you're engaging people, starting off by calling them racist, and your intention is to convince them of something, that's not the best way to go. But I think there's also, it's important to sort of when you're not engaging them directly and you do not believe that there is a way to convince them, or strategically it doesn't make the most sense to convince them of anything, then calling out racism when you see it is also important. So, I mean, I get your point.
There's no language on the left. I'm sorry. I just feel like the people that are calling them racist are often wealthy liberals, and there's often no language on the left to describe the situation. Like if you're gentrifying Bed-Stuy, one could say, let's stop those people. Let's stop the white hipsters from going in there, or at least have some thoughtful process there. But to have Somali immigrants going into Youngstown, Ohio, or whatever, I don't know, to describe sort of, let's have a thoughtful process about how people in the community, there can be there needs to be some language there, and I don't have that.
I think he's pointing to a general hypocrisy too on the part of wealthy liberals when they say, oh, all you Trump supporters are racist and you're rude and you're crude, but then they turn around and support policies that in their outcomes are also quite racist. So I think maybe that's part of what he's getting at. And also on a more general level, I think we have this liberal concept of racism as this, if you're a racist, you're a bad person and there's no coming back from it. While racism is systemic and we probably all have a little bit inside of us. So it's better to think about it in terms of our actions and in terms of the outcomes of.
First of all, I hate white people a lot, and I'm honest about that. But I had a question about this, Sam.
Hold on. But let me just address that. Is that one, I think, yes, obviously, if people are supporting racist policies and imposing, or calling other people racist, obviously that's not good. I think, yes, there is a spectrum, I think, of which some people on that spectrum are gettable and convertible, and others, I think, the return on investment is just not there. And because you're starting to have to sort of trade away certain of things. But yes, I think when we start to hear these conversations about just attacking immigration, it may be playing on some economic anxieties that people have, although there isn't necessarily a huge amount of data to that bears that out. It's not like, those people marching in Charlottesville were not people who were, they were not situated on the economic scale or in a certain class that they may have some economic anxiety, but that's, maybe they still want to be, part of the 5% or whatever it is.
Well, isn't there a distinction between economic anxiety and economic these people
definitely
are anxious about their economic.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. But so, I think, look, I also think that it's conceivable that in Yonkers at that time, there was not the, the people who were working on integrating people into a community that there exists these days. And of course, we're also seeing cuts to these type of things, right? That help to integrate immigrants into communities. But I don't know. I mean, I think that it's if it is not clear that what Donald Trump is doing is trying to gin up racial animus, and we don't make that clear, I think it's a mistake.
I completely agree with being clear about not just Trump, but the entirety of the Republican Party. And I also agree with making distinctions between people who are persuadable and people who aren't. But I do think that it's a really big problem that was exemplified very specifically by the Clinton campaign, that if in the popular imagination, any type of like politics of anti-bigotry of any sort, whether it be gender or race or anything, is associated even implicitly in people's minds with a policy that does nothing for them economically, I think that's like incredibly dangerous and destructive. So my thing would be like, we'll do a lot for you economically and we're not going to cater to your bullshit. But conversely, if you're going around and saying like, we've got nothing for you economically, and you need to be more but that's what the caller was in his own way, I think, addressing. And we could say like, I think sometimes this is where we need to remind ourselves.
No,
we might be,
that's not. Listen, I'm familiar with that episode in Yonkers, and people were afraid. Basically, it was a NIMBY situation. We don't want these people coming because they're going to now. That may be born out of a certain amount of economic anxiety, but this was not a politician running a campaign. And yes, maybe there could have been better outreach. I'm not denying that. But I think we're extending the metaphor a little bit further, too far here. I don't think that anybody should go around and not provide a full spectrum program for people when they're running for office. Obviously not.
Well, the basic fear, the connection being that people were identifying a middle class lifestyle that they could acquire for not having that much money, right? And I think that there is this perception. I also studied busing a little bit in Boston, and you know a lot more about this than me, but like massive, unbelievable amount of racism. I mean, Boston's one of the most bigoted places in the country. And at the same time, there was the perception, which wasn't inaccurate, that like, this is happening in working class neighborhoods. None of this is happening in like wealthier suburbs or areas. That like there is a policy apparatus here that doesn't implicate a Harvard professor,
right,
but implicates me. And that's that double problem of what Jamie's identifying of the certain hypocrisy and blind spots among the elite. And then I think not going into neighborhoods and being like, look, your racism or whatever other form of bigotry is unacceptable. We completely won't cater to it. And we get it with regards to the economics, and there's no contradiction.
And maybe lead with what we're going to do for you economically, and then say we're not going to cater to your bullshit.
I agree.
Like, don't make it the tip of the spear.
I agree.
Hillary Clinton's campaign in the public imagination, and this isn't just like my, I've heard it.
Let's not.
And what we're going to do,
everybody knows this about Hillary at this point.
Like, but I don't. Okay, but as a stand-in for a line of argument, fine, whatever. We don't have to.
What is the broader argument, though? I think
the broader argument is that there's still a contingent in modern politics and in the Democratic Party that is very, I would really like to retire this phrase, but pretty woke on so-called social issues and still really pre-woke on economic and corporate
Joe Kennedy
ones.
Is a perfect example.
And when you fuse together those two messages, I don't know about Joe Kennedy, but I'm saying if you fuse together being, progressive on social and status quo on economic, that's just a really bad fusion.
I mean, I don't think Joe Kennedy. I mean, Joe Kennedy has certain problems, and but in terms of like his rhetoric, I think his rhetoric, supposedly contends with, working class people. I don't. Well, I'm not sure I trust it, but
I'm also sick of people acting like when you say we're going to cater to you economically via broad sweeping redistribution programs, that people like Bernie are only talking to the white working class. Like, that helps the entire working class. So I think I hope that we will see less of that as time goes on. Less of that misapprehension or willful misrepresentation.
Are you really saying that we can't, are we retiring Hillary references?
Oh, God.
Is that what's going on?
Well, I just think that like
you're a stealth cuck for Hillary.
I think there is
totally are a
DNC
stealth.
operative.
I think there's a certain amount of. I think there's a certain amount of like. I mean, I think like
Maybe you did kill Seth Rich.
Well, there were other reasons.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But I do think that like there was a unique quality to that campaign in its failure.
Unique
And
lack of reality basis.
I think so. But
yeah, I agree. I think Obama campaign, Bernie policies. That's the fusion.
Exactly.
well, that's what everybody. I think there was a lot of people who thought that's what they were getting with Obama at the time.
Well, that's another issue, but I'm just saying, like, Obama actually, from a campaign perspective, I actually think he did a great job of fusing together. We're a multicultural, multi-identity, and also not in an exclusive way. Like, I'm into every demographic and type of people possible, and he did. Yeah, you're right.
I got a racist grandma.
I got a racist grandma. I like a transgender bar owner and the factory owner in Indiana, and everybody's gonna get hooked up. Psych.